The weather outside is frightful, but Weed Talk News is delightful, starting with a bipartisan bill in the Senate and another professional sports league accepts cannabis on Weed Talk News next. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Weed Talk News. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media.
And I'm Rye Russell from WeedBudz Radio and your main man.
Hey, did you guys get buried by snow up there over the past 24 hours?
We sure have. We got buried and we're still getting buried. It's still coming down up here.
I don't miss those Maine winters. That's all I can say. Our first story is out of the nation's capital. It's pretty obvious to me that this lame duck Congress wants to adjourn for the holidays since it looks like they're getting some things done. We should be getting a COVID relief bill before the end of the year. Plus, the Senate actually passed a bill that was pro-cannabis. Sorry, it's not the MORE Act or the Safe Banking Bill, but it is Cannabidiol and Marijuana Research Expansion Act. Not only will this streamline the application process to allow researchers to study the plant, but it will also allow doctors to talk about the risks and benefits of medicinal use of cannabis, and now will require that the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, they will now have to submit a report on those potential health benefits. Rye, the fact that this bill passed unanimously shows that there might actually be hope for a change of direction in the Senate about cannabis. Can you believe it?
I cannot believe that. It was incredible. And speaking of hope, Jimmy, from the NBA and the National Basketball Players Association have agreed not to conduct randomized tests for marijuana during the 2020-2021 season. And a spokesperson for the NBA said that due to the unusual circumstances in conjunction with the pandemic, they have agreed with the Players Association to suspend random testing for marijuana for this season. And we saw this enacted during the bubble at Walt Disney World when they came back to finish the playoffs. And so it's exciting. And I would predict that that probably will not come back in 2022.
Probably not. And by the way, just for the record, if anybody knows the history of the National Basketball Association, they've been pretty pro-cannabis, wink, wink, for a long time. But now it's time to go to New York for Debra Borchart's Green Market Report and her story about how Curaleaf is no longer the biggest cannabis company in the world. Deb?
Thanks, guys. The big news this week, of course, was the announced merger between Aphria and Tilray. Aphria is going to own over 60% of the new company, and Irwin Simon, Aphria's CEO, is going to take on the same role at the new company. However, it's going to be known as Tilray and use the Tilray symbol. Now, the deal looks great for Tilray, but investors feel it is less positive for Aphria. Aurora Cannabis extended its credit facility and said it is closing the Aurora Sun operation, resulting in the layoffs of 200 employees. The company also said it could delay its ability to achieve profitability. Still, this company has $450 million in cash on hand. California-based cannabis company Indus Holdings has filed a 100 million Canadian dollar offering. Now, while their September quarter was good, Indus said its December quarter is expecting lower harvest yields due to plant stress experienced when they had to seal the greenhouses to prevent poor air quality from entering due to the wildfires in California. The company also said it expects a net revenue drop down to about $9.5 million to $11.5 million. That's down from $14 million. And that's the big news this week. We wish everyone a happy holidays from the Green Market Report.
Our next story comes from a California newsletter called Weed Week. They reported this week about a wrongful termination lawsuit that's been filed against the company that's run by one of the most popular characters and personalities in the cannabis scene in LA. His name is Mike Straumietis. He's known as Big Mike, and especially if I butchered his last name. And he's also the CEO of Advanced Nutrients, recognized as one of the best-selling cannabis fertilizers with an annual revenue of more than $100 million. Now, the headline on Weed Week reads, quote, Advanced nutrients is racist, unquote. Ex-employees sue fertilizer company. Now, Rye, how many wrongful termination lawsuits are filed every day in a lot of different American businesses? Quite a few, right?
There are so many, and there's so many different circumstances surrounding those situations. And so sometimes I think it can be a little unnerving when the media thinks that they're the courts.
That's right. But when two former employees claim race is an issue, plus you add in the celebrity factor of a guy who has been named host of the new marijuana, or is it the next marijuana millionaire show? Anyway, he also hosts legendary parties at his Malibu mansion. It becomes a big news story. Big Mike, by the way, has 2.6 million followers on Instagram, and WeWeek has 10,000 email distribution. So the company's statement is kind of predictable here. Advanced Nutrients has denied all these allegations by these two ex-employees. And that means, don't you just love LA? And isn't that where the Emerge webinar took place this week, Rye? You were involved with that, weren't you?
I sure was. I was honored to return a second time. I hope that they will ask me back for that famed three-peat. But the Emerge Cannabis Conference has wrapped up its second event of this year. It's a 3-day virtual cannabis conference, and it saw over 30 sessions, more than 2,500 individuals and entrepreneurs from all over the world, and an A-list cast of speakers and panels, including Snoop Dogg, who received the Lifetime Achievement Award by the organization, and also our friends at the Last Prisoner Project was celebrated for their social impact contributions. So I had the pleasure of being there, Jimmy. It was a well-executed event, and just the content's incredible. And now we get to go to Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast for our DC report.
Hi, I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast, and this is the Weed Talk News DC report. The U.S. Senate has approved a bipartisan bill to expand marijuana and CBD research. In bipartisan fashion, the Cannabidiol and Marijuana Research Expansion Act passed the GOP-controlled Senate less than 1 week after the House passed a similar cannabis research legislation. The two bills must now be reconciled and approved before the current congressional session ends on January 3rd, 2021. Republican Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa, a co-sponsor of the bill, said in a statement, quote, "Researching marijuana is widely supported by my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, and it's a smart step forward in addressing this current Schedule I drug." A Kansas man who was infected with the coronavirus while in prison tells Congress he felt as if he had been, quote, "sentenced to death for a first-time marijuana offense." Testifying by video before the House Judiciary Committee Subcommittee on Crime, Dante Westmoreland told lawmakers that he had been released after serving 4 years of an 8-year sentence for allegedly selling cannabis. The release came after exculpatory evidence came to light, but not before Westmoreland contracted COVID-19. Having since recovered, Westmoreland told the subcommittee he felt encouraged by the spate of successful reform measures in the November elections. At the same time, however, Westmoreland testified that he considered it terribly unfair that he was serving time while others in states across the country were growing, buying, and selling cannabis legally. As Westmoreland lamented, quote, "There I was sitting in prison for allegedly doing the same thing." The Federal Trade Commission announced this week that it is cracking down on companies making deceptive claims about products containing cannabidiol, or CBD. In particular, the FTC is taking action against 6 companies for allegedly making scientifically unsupported claims about their product's ability to treat a range of illnesses, including cancer, heart disease, and Alzheimer's. Dubbed Operation CB Deceit, the action mandates that all companies stop making such claims, and in some cases, calls for monetary judgments. That's the Weed Talk News DC report for this week. I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast.
Another shocking story about graft, corruption, bribery, and extortion right here in Massachusetts. The former chief of staff of disgraced former Fall River Mayor Yasiel Correa has pleaded guilty to extortion, bribery, and making a false statement to authorities. This stems from a cannabis company that was looking for preferential treatment in exchange for a host security agreement in Fall River. This is, of course, the first step in the licensing process in the Bay State. You have to get the host security agreement. Now, Geneva Andrade of Somerset entered a guilty plea in this case in Massachusetts. The former mayor has pleaded not guilty, and he goes to trial in February of next year. But I bet you know who will be the star witness in that case, right?
Well, I have some positive news. Verano Holdings, which is a large multi-state cannabis operator, has announced that it will be seeking to go public on the Canadian exchange sometime in early 2021. This filing, and with the addition of a merger with Alternative Medical Enterprises, will move Verano Holdings up to one of those top 3 largest cannabis operators in the nation, which is poised to be over a $15 billion market by the end of this year. So it's exciting to see a lot of great industry moves being made. And with the Canadian Stock Exchange, I think we should toss it over to Solomon Israel from Marijuana Business Daily's International Canadian Report.
I'm Solomon Israel from Marijuana Business Daily International, and this is the Weed Talk News Canadian Cannabis Report. Aphria and Tilray are tying the knot, announcing a merger this week that would create a company worth about 5 billion Canadian dollars. The merged company will be called Tilray, and Aphria CEO Irwin Simon will take the helm. Simon says he plans to capture at least 30% market share in Canada, and the combined company also has its eye on Europe and the United States. Aurora Cannabis has cut more than 200 jobs, the latest round of layoffs this year. The company cut production at its enormous Aurora Sky facility in Edmonton, Alberta, as it grapples with an industry-wide oversupply problem. Aurora's chief science officer, Jonathan Page, also is leaving the company. And Canadian producer Hexo reported a net loss of 4.2 million Canadian dollars for the quarter ended October 31st, with revenue growing on a quarterly basis. Hexo says its beverage joint venture with Molson Coors Canada now holds the #1 position in Canadian cannabis beverages. However, beverage sales still account for less than 2% of the market in Canada. You can read all those stories and more at MJBizDaily.com. I'm Solomon Israel from Marijuana Business Daily.
So I bet you're wondering what it's like to be a cannabis activist in a foreign country. Well, Martin Condon is just that in Cork, Ireland, where he hosts a podcast called Martin's World Podcast. We interviewed him this week on a cannabis chat, and sure enough, Ireland is now allowing delivery for medical cannabis. You would think that's a good thing because for years, Irish residents had to go to the Netherlands to get their medical marijuana. Now, because of the international travel ban, because of COVID, Ireland will now be allowing delivery. But according to Martin, it's still not that easy to be pro-cannabis in Ireland.
Ireland has been very much going through a journey there in discovering medical cannabis. We've about just less than 50 patients here now who have a license to be prescribed cannabis. And the latest news from Ireland then in regards to that is those patients no longer have to leave Ireland to go to Holland to collect that medicine. Because all along, patients actually had to leave Ireland to go to Holland to collect that medicine. So now they're going to be able to continue getting it delivered to their front door by some private courier. So there's a lot happening over here.
Hey, Jimmy, do you want to feel good?
Yes.
Well, I have some good news for the holiday season. We are seeing another prisoner released from a minor cannabis infraction. This time, this Louisiana gentleman was allegedly sold $20 worth of cannabis to an undercover police officer, and he was given life sentence. And luckily, he only had to serve 12 years, which is still a lot, and that's a lot of one person's life, but it is nice to finally see more stories of individuals being released.
All we need is another 500,000 and we might actually break even, because there's a lot in jail right now for these horrific cannabis possession crimes, of just ridiculous possession crimes. All those records need to be expunged, and maybe that will be a top story in 2021. Now, Rye, I get to ask you, what are your top 5 stories in cannabis in 2020?
Wow, in 2020, that's a lot of pressure. Well, there was the story of Maine adult use rollout. So that is personally, that has to be my number one. Very exciting. My number 2 would have to be these types of stories that we hear from the Last Prisoner Project and others. Like, these are the types of stories that really energize me, and there's been a few of those. And so that's really exciting. Number 3 has to be the introduction of Maine Bioplastics Company, Not Plastic, and their contribution working with the state of Maine to really identify some hemp plastic solutions. So that's a good one.
Now, wait a second. Wait a second. We have to explain. This is your company, isn't it?
This is my company. We are ending the year on a high note. It has been an incredible, struggle of a year, as with most businesses, but finally are in a position to really make an impact utilizing hemp. Number 4, cannabis won the election. Like, we saw that, and you can't take that back. And I would say number 5 might even be the kicker. Was cannabis was deemed essential. That might actually be my number 1 story of the year.
And that was my number 1 story. I'll unveil the rest of them on the Green Rush with David Rabinovitz on Friday, because that is going to be the theme of our show. We also have Andrew D'Angelo calling in right at the first half hour of the program. So that's going to be worth checking out, not only live at 4 p.m. Eastern time, but also on demand. And that actually is going to wrap up our live streams for 2020. Next week, we're going to go into a binge world. We're going to be live streaming for 12 hours, all of our best of content on Facebook and on YouTube. So you definitely want to check out the Pro Cannabis Media website, our pages, and all that, to see what we deem to be the best of. And by the way, it's not all going to be about me or Rye or Weed Talk News. We've got the Best of Green Nurse group. We've also got the Vote Pro podcast guys involved with this, and a few other surprises along the way as well. So for everybody here at Pro Cannabis Media, I'm Jimmy Young. I'm wishing you the happiest of holiday seasons. And Rye Russell, a special welcome to you, and a big thank you for all the work that you've done with us over this past year.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all of those that have tuned in to enjoy the show. It has been a pleasure to spend this last half of the year with you all.
And remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Let's use it responsibly. Happy New Year. Happy holidays, everybody.
We Talk Now, We Talk News, and In the Weeds are all available on most major podcast distributors like iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, and our friends at clnsmedia.com and our flagship, cannabis.net. So subscribe, share, and like our videos on all the social media networks out there, including LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, the WeedTube, and YouTube. Weed Talk and In the Weeds are 2 productions of Pro Cannabis Media, supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge, and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.